Hello and welcome to part 2 of Anecdotal Records and Checklists. This session focuses on using anecdotal records and checklists to collect and interpret child observation and assessment information. Anecdotal records and checklists are effective, commonly used methods for determining and tracking children's progress. The information gathered with these strategies is used to improve instruction and children's learning. During this session, you will increase your knowledge and skills in writing anecdotal records, recording information using checklists, and analyzing and understanding anecdotal information in checklists. By the end of the session, you will be able to explain the benefits of using checklists, use checklists, explain to families about a child's progress using a checklist, describe and use anecdotal records and checklists within the assessment instructional cycle, and interpret assessment information. Okay, so let's talk more about using checklists. On Blackboard, you will find examples of commercially available checklists. Take a look at them and think, do these appear easy to use? Why or why not? Would the collected information be useful and understandable? Why or why not? There are several benefits to using checklists as a method for ongoing child assessment. Checklists can be made for multiple purposes. They can be used to monitor the progress of specific skills for an entire class of children, for a small group of children working towards common goals, and for individual children where progress may be monitored more frequently. Frequent monitoring of child progress allows for adjustment of instruction. For example, a teacher may be more interested in frequently monitoring the progress of children who will be entering kindergarten the following year and are demonstrating weaknesses with letter identification as compared to younger children in the classroom. The teacher can use the information that results from frequent monitoring to adjust the instruction of letter identification if progress is not adequate. Checklists can also be used by several different observers to gather information on the same children. They provide a written reminder about what to observe. Because checklists are designed to be clear and objective, the teacher and teacher assistant can both use checklists for monitoring children's progress without worrying about collecting different data. When the skills being rated are specific and observable, and the meaning of ratings is clear, a checklist is valid and a reliable way to gather data. As a result, the checklist will be useful in collecting information needed to improve teaching and learning. Finally, the information gathered from checklists can be used to facilitate conversations about child progress between family and staff. Okay, we're going to read a classroom scenario and then create a checklist on which the teacher will collect data. This will be found in your week-by-week section on Blackboard and is listed as a journal. This learning activity will also be found on the same journal entry from the previous slide. Let's talk about anecdotal records and checklists within the assessment instructional cycle. Once assessment information has been gathered, it must be organized and interpreted. Anecdotal records and checklists are two methods commonly used to record observations during everyday activities. After teaching teams organize the data that has been gathered, they work to synthesize or make sense of the information. Once teachers understand their documented observations, they will be ready to use the information to improve teaching and learning. The process of recording observations of children, working to make sense of the assessment information, and then using that understanding to improve teaching and learning creates a continuous cycle. This slide illustrates the assessment instructional cycle. You've learned about the importance of observing and documenting. Common ways to document your observations include making anecdotal records and completing checklists. In order for the anecdotal records and checklist information to be valuable, the teaching team needs to use it. On many occasions, members of teaching teams collect data and make instructional decisions right as they teach. This leads to real-time adjustments to teaching. Teaching team members engage in the teaching process, and as they teach, they gather data about what children say and do. They then use this assessment information as the basis for adjusting their teaching as needed to help children learn. Teachers might make in-the-moment or real-time decisions to change the difficulty of a task for children. For example, if assessment information being gathered shows a child giving many incorrect answers, a teacher may immediately offer extra help. A child who is unable to name the toy animal she's playing with might benefit from being given 2 or 3 animal names from which to choose. If assessment information being collected shows that an activity is too easy for a child, a teacher might encourage learning by immediately making the task more challenging. A child who writes words on his drawings might learn more from being invited to write his own description of drawing rather than simply being asked to dictate the description for an adult to write. Periodic review of the status of children's learning and development leads to a more contemplative approach to changes in teaching and learning. Whether on the spot or on a periodic basis, like every quarter, after documentation, the teaching team interprets the information by looking at the facts or data and using them to plan instruction and to make changes in teaching so that every child will learn. You've asked an assessment question, perhaps about how the children's early literacy skills are developing. The processes of observation and documentation are only the beginning as you try to determine what the children know and need to learn in an area of development. By organizing the assessment information you've gathered, you take a step towards understanding what the data mean. Information about each child or groups of children can be organized in a variety of ways. You might use paper files or electronic files to sort anecdotal records and checklists according to the areas of the curriculum and/or development. Once the information has been organized, it may be summarized to better understand how individual children or groups are progressing. Perhaps there's a number of anecdotes about a child in the writing corner, using letter-like symbols to write notes to relatives. You also have information on a checklist of early reading skills about this child and others' knowledge in areas of literacy development. Once you have enough information to accurately represent a child's performance, you'll be able to summarize what is known. How can you tell what the child can do in early literacy? How can you determine what the child still needs to learn? Many teaching teams use paper or electronic filing systems to organize anecdotal records and checklist data that show child's progress. What might be included in a child's file and why? How often do you organize anecdotes and checklist information that have been gathered? And how do you share organized assessment information from anecdotes and checklists with children's families? The purpose of ongoing assessment is to inform instruction. Paper or electronic file content should be representative of children's everyday performance and document their accomplishment of curricular objectives and progress related to the domains of the Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework. In addition to anecdotal records and checklist information, file contents may include other types of ongoing assessment information. Portfolios may include documentation such as work samples, photos, samples of language, and video clips. It's very important to know that assessment information being gathered is organized on a regular basis so that it does not pile up. In addition to informing classroom instruction, organized files serve as a record of progress for families. Their use may contribute to positive relationships with families, and families may also make contributions to assessment file content. This sample shows the status of children in the program in relation to benchmarks. This is an example of how assessment information may be organized so that it's useful in making decisions about teaching and learning. Understanding what assessment information means goes beyond determining whether a child or children have or not yet achieved particular abilities. Once assessment information has been gathered using effective methods and organized, you'll be able to determine how children are progressing. Okay, let's talk about how to interpret assessment information. By considering the assessment information, you may work to understand what it means about children's progress. Are children reaching curriculum goals and standards as expected? Are most children progressing well? Are there areas of concern that apply to the entire group? Does the assessment data reveal areas of concern for individuals or subgroups of children, such as those from particular backgrounds or those with inconsistent attendance? Teachers who clearly understand what assessment information means are able to use their insights to improve teaching and learning. You'll learn more about using data to improve teaching and learning in a future module. This simple graph shows the status of children in the class at 3 different points in time, fall, winter, and spring, in relation to the benchmarks. This is an example of how assessment information may be organized so that the teaching team may determine how children are progressing. In these sessions about observation and assessment, we've explored 2 effective methods for gathering information about children's development and learning. Both anecdotal records and checklists are commonly used during everyday activities to keep track of what children can do and need to learn. Teachers use anecdotal records to objectively document what children do and say. Checklists are an efficient way to document children's progress in relation to specific skills. Teachers address assessment questions by collecting assessment information, organizing the data they've collected, and analyzing the information to determine how children are progressing. So let's review what we've talked about. We've explained the benefits of using checklists, how to use checklists, how to explain to families about a child's progress using a checklist, how to describe and use anecdotal records and checklists within the assessment instructional cycle, and how to interpret assessment information.